I was called poor, but my generosity fed those who once closed their doors. They measured my worth by the patches on my coat and the cracks in my doorstep. They counted my value in the silence of my empty purse and the faded color of my curtains. But what they never counted, what they refused to see, was the richness of my heart, the fullness of my table when others had nothing, and the warmth of my hands when theirs turned cold. I remember the day it all changed, when the same people who slammed their doors in my face came crawling back with empty plates and hollow eyes. Life, you see, has a beautiful and terrible way of teaching us what we refuse to learn on our own. Welcome, my dear. This is Grandma Alice Stories, where every tale carries a lesson and every wound carries wisdom. Pull up close, pour yourself some tea and settle in, because this story isn't just about poverty or pride. It's about what happens when the world judges you by what you don't have, and life quietly rewards you for what you freely give. Listen carefully now, child, because what I'm about to tell you will remind you that mercy is never wasted, even when it's given to those who don't deserve it. I grew up on the forgotten side of town, where the streets had more potholes than pavement and the houses leaned like tired old men. My home was small, just 3 rooms and a porch that creaked with every step, but it was mine. The wallpaper was peeling, yes, and the roof leaked when it rained hard, but I kept it clean, kept it warm, and most importantly, I kept it open. People in town knew me as Poor Alice. Not Alice the seamstress who mended their clothes when they couldn't afford the tailor. Not Alice the cook who baked bread for church gatherings without asking for a dime. Just Poor Alice, the woman with worn-out shoes and a faded dress that I'd sewn myself from leftover fabric. They saw my poverty like it was a disease, something contagious, something shameful. But I didn't see it that way. I saw every day as a gift. I saw every neighbor as a soul worth knowing. And when someone needed help, a cup of flour, a listening ear, a place to cry when life got too heavy, my door was always open. I gave because that's what my mama taught me. Alice, she'd say, when you have 2 loaves of bread and your neighbor has none, you don't eat both and tell them to pray harder. You break one in half and sit together. So that's what I did. I shared my last jar of preserves with Mrs. Henderson when her husband left her. I babysat the Collins children for free when their mother worked double shifts. I even gave my winter coat to young Jamie Porter when I saw him shivering at the bus stop, even though it meant I'd be cold myself. And what did I get in return? Whispers, pity, averted eyes. When my furnace broke one bitter January and I knocked on doors asking if anyone had a space heater I could borrow for just one night, I heard the locks click. I saw curtains twitch. I stood there in the cold, my breath fogging the air, and listened to the silence of rejection. Mrs. Henderson, whose preserves I'd replaced, pretended she wasn't home even though I could see her shadow moving behind the glass. The Collins family said they didn't have anything to spare, though I'd seen them unload a brand new television from their car just 2 days before. And Jamie Porter's mother? She opened the door halfway, looked me up and down, and said, "We can't be lending things out right now, Alice. You understand." I understood, all right. I understood that kindness wasn't a currency they valued unless it was flowing in their direction. But I didn't let it harden me. Couldn't. Because the moment you let bitterness take root in your heart, child, it chokes out everything beautiful trying to grow there. So I went home, wrapped myself in every blanket I owned, and made it through the night. And the next morning, I woke up and kept living the only way I knew how, with my hands open and my heart soft. The years passed. I kept giving. They kept taking. And the distance between us grew wider, though we lived on the same street. Then one autumn, everything changed. The factory on the edge of town, the one that employed half the neighborhood, shut down without warning. Jobs disappeared like smoke. Families who'd been comfortable suddenly found themselves struggling to put food on the table. Pride crumbled faster than the fall leaves. I watched it happen from my little porch. I saw the for sale signs pop up like weeds. I heard the arguments through thin walls, the crying children, the desperation that settles over a community when security vanishes overnight. And then they started coming to my door. First, it was Mrs. Henderson. She stood on my porch with her eyes down, wringing her hands. "Alice," she said quietly, "I know I haven't been. I know we haven't." Her voice cracked. "My pantry's empty. Do you have anything? Even a can of soup? That I could?" I looked at her standing there, this woman who'd locked me out in the cold, now asking me for warmth. Every part of me wanted to say what she'd said to me. "I can't be lending things out right now. You understand." But when I opened my mouth, different words came out. "Come inside." I fed her. I sent her home with a bag of rice and beans and 2 jars of tomato sauce I'd canned myself. The next day, it was the Collins family. Then Jamie Porter's mother. Then others. People who'd walked past me on the street without a word, who'd called me poor behind my back, who'd made me feel small for not having what they had. They all came, one by one, hungry, humbled, ashamed, and one by one I fed them. I didn't do it because they deserved it. I did it because I deserved to remain who I was, no matter how they treated me. I did it because mercy isn't about keeping score. It's about keeping your soul clean. But child, let me tell you something I learned during those months. Watching someone eat food from your table when they once refused to let you through their door. It changes something in the air between you. Some of them couldn't meet my eyes. Some of them cried. And some of them, the ones whose pride still sat heavy on their shoulders, took what I offered and left without a word of thanks, as if accepting charity from poor Alice was the worst humiliation they'd ever endured. I didn't say anything. I just kept my door open and my pot simmering. Because I knew something they didn't know yet. I knew that life was teaching them a lesson I'd learned long ago. That what you close your heart to when you have plenty will be what you desperately need when you have nothing. That winter was long and cold. My cupboards grew emptier. My back grew more tired. But every time someone knocked, I answered. And then one evening, as snow began to fall, I heard a knock that was different from the others. Harder. More demanding. I opened the door, and there stood Gerald Marcus, the wealthiest man in town, the one who owned the building where half these people used to work, the one who'd shut down the factory and walked away without a backward glance. He looked at me with eyes that held no shame, no humility, only expectation. "I hear you've been feeding people," he said. "I need to talk to you about that." And in that moment, I knew. The real test hadn't even begun yet. Gerald Marcus stood on my porch like he owned it, because in his mind, he probably thought he owned everything in this town, including me. The snow fell soft behind him, but there was nothing soft about the way he looked at me, like I was a problem he needed to solve. I'd fed the hungry, opened my door to the desperate, and given from my own emptiness. But now the man who'd created all that hunger was standing at my threshold, and something in my spirit whispered, "Be careful, Alice. This one doesn't come for bread. He comes for control." I didn't step aside to let him in. Not right away. I just stood there in my doorway, my hands still on the knob, looking up at this man who'd never once looked down at me before. Gerald Marcus was tall, broad-shouldered, and always dressed like he was on his way to somewhere important. Even now, in the middle of our town's worst crisis, his coat was clean, his shoes were polished, and his expression was carved from stone. "Mrs. Alice," he said, and I noticed he didn't call me poor Alice, not to my face anyway. "May I come in? I think we should have a conversation." Everything in me wanted to say no, wanted to tell him that my home wasn't a place for men who closed factories and opened wounds. But I'd spent months opening my door to people who'd hurt me, and I wasn't about to become them now. "It's cold out there," I said quietly. "Come in." He stepped inside, and suddenly my small living room felt even smaller. He didn't sit down, just stood there looking around. At my patched furniture, my faded curtains, my humble little space that had somehow become the lifeline for half the neighborhood. "I'll get straight to the point," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I've heard you've been distributing food to people in town. Quite a lot of people, from what I understand." "I've been sharing what I have," I corrected him gently. "There's a difference." He waved his hand like the distinction didn't matter. Whatever you want to call it. The problem is, it's creating expectations. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Expectations. People are getting comfortable with handouts, he said, his voice firm. They're not looking for work as hard as they should be. They're sitting around waiting for the next meal from you instead of figuring out how to provide for themselves. I stared at him. This man who'd laid off 200 people without warning, who'd packed up his factory equipment in the middle of the night and left folks scrambling, was standing in my home telling me that I was the problem. Mr. Marcus? I said slowly, choosing my words like I was picking my way through broken glass. These people aren't lazy. They're hungry. There's no work because there's no factory. There's no factory because it wasn't profitable anymore. He cut me off. That's business, Mrs. Alice. I don't expect you to understand economics, but sometimes hard decisions have to be made. And sometimes, I said, my voice steady despite the anger rising in my throat. When hard decisions leave people starving, other people step in to help. That's not economics. That's humanity. His jaw tightened. I didn't come here to debate philosophy with you. I came here to make you an offer. That caught me off guard. An offer. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. Thick, white, expensive looking. I'm prepared to compensate you for the charitable work you've been doing, he said, holding it out to me. Consider it a community investment. But I need you to do something for me in return. I didn't take the envelope. What's that? I need you to start directing people toward opportunities I'm creating, he said. I'm opening a new facility on the other side of the county. Smaller operation, different kind of work. The pay isn't what the factory was, and the hours are longer, but it's something. I need influential people in the community, people like you, to encourage folks to take these positions instead of waiting around for something better. I felt my stomach turn. You want me to convince people to work for less money and longer hours? I want you to help them help themselves, he said smoothly. Right now, you're enabling dependency. What I'm offering is a path to dignity through work. The envelope still hung between us, and I could see it was thick with bills. More money than I'd seen in months, maybe years. Money that could refill my pantry, fix my roof, buy me a new coat. Money that came with chains attached. Mr. Marcus, I said quietly, I think you should leave. His eyebrows rose. You're refusing? Do you have any idea how much is in here? I don't care if it's $1 million, I said, and I meant it. I'm not going to trick people into thinking your scraps are a feast. I'm not going to be the voice that leads them into another trap just because you're paying me to do it. The warmth in his expression, what little there was, disappeared completely. His face went cold, hard. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice low and dangerous. A serious mistake. Maybe, I said, but it's my mistake to make. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating, reassessing. Then he put the envelope back in his pocket and buttoned his coat. You know what your problem is, Mrs. Alice? He said as he walked toward the door. You think being poor makes you noble. You think suffering makes you righteous. But all it really makes you is powerless. He opened the door, and the cold rushed in. When your pantry runs dry and you have nothing left to give, he continued, those people you're feeding won't remember your kindness. They'll just move on to the next source. And you'll be exactly where you were before. Alone, poor, and irrelevant. He stepped out into the snow and paused on the porch, looking back at me one last time. You had a chance to be part of something bigger than yourself, he said. Don't come knocking on my door when you realize what you've given up. And then he was gone, his footprints disappearing into the white. I closed the door and stood there in the sudden silence, my heart pounding. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the effort it had taken not to shout, not to throw him out, not to let his words burrow under my skin. Because the terrible thing was, part of what he'd said was true. My pantry was running low. I was getting tired, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep feeding people before I had nothing left to give. I walked to my kitchen and opened the cupboard. 3 cans of beans, a half bag of rice, some flour, A few potatoes that were starting to sprout. Enough for maybe 3 more days if I stretched it. Maybe 4 if I didn't eat. I sat down at my kitchen table. The same table where I'd served meal after meal to people who'd once slammed their doors in my face. And I let myself feel the weight of it all. The exhaustion. The uncertainty. The quiet fear that maybe, just maybe, I'd given too much and left nothing for myself. But then I thought about the faces I'd seen. The gratitude in Mrs. Henderson's eyes. The way the Collins children had hugged me when I'd sent them home with cookies. The trembling hands of Jamie Porter's mother as she'd whispered thank you for the first time in her life. I thought about who I'd be if I stopped now. If I took Gerald Marcus's money and became the kind of person who measured worth in dollars instead of dignity. And I knew that I'd rather run out of food than run out of soul. That night, I prayed harder than I'd prayed in years. I asked for strength. I asked for provision. I asked for a sign that what I was doing mattered, that it wasn't just foolish pride disguised as charity. I didn't get an answer, not that night. But the next morning, when I woke up and looked out my window, I saw something that made my breath catch. There were people gathering in my yard. Not just 1 or 2, but dozens. And they weren't carrying empty plates. They were carrying full ones. They came at dawn, when the world was still wrapped in that soft blue light that makes everything look like a dream. I stood at my window in my old nightgown, my hand pressed against the cold glass, watching them gather in my yard like a congregation answering a call I never made. The Collins family with a basket covered in cloth. Mrs. Henderson carrying a pot that steamed in the morning air. Jamie Porter's mother with her arms full of grocery bags. And more. So many more. Each one carrying something, offering something, giving something back. I'd spent months pouring myself out for people who'd once turned me away, and now they were standing at my door, ready to pour back into me. Child, let me tell you, that's when I learned that mercy never returns empty-handed. It just takes time to complete the circle. I threw a shawl over my shoulders and opened the door, stepping out onto my porch. The cold bit at my bare feet, but I barely felt it. All I could see were the faces. Faces I'd fed. Faces that had cried at my table. Faces that had carried shame and hunger and desperation through my doorway. Now they carried something else entirely. Mrs. Alice. It was Tom Collins who spoke first, stepping forward with his wife beside him. We heard about Gerald Marcus coming here yesterday. My heart skipped. How did you? Word travels fast in a small town, Mrs. Henderson said, moving closer. His secretary told her sister, who told the postman, who told half the neighborhood. We know what he offered you. We know what he wanted you to do. And we know you said no, Jamie Porter's mother added, her voice thick with emotion. You said no to money you needed because you wouldn't betray us. I opened my mouth to speak, but Tom held up his hand. Let us finish, he said gently. We've been taking and taking from you for months now. Eating your food, warming ourselves at your fire, crying on your shoulder. And we told ourselves it was okay because you offered, because you insisted, because you made us feel like we weren't a burden. You weren't, I started, but Mrs. Henderson shook her head. Hush now, Alice. Let us say what we should have said a long time ago. She stepped forward, setting her pot down on my porch steps. The smell of beef stew rose up, rich and hearty. We were wrong, she said, her eyes meeting mine. We were wrong when we closed our doors to you. We were wrong when we judged you for being poor while we pretended to be rich. We were wrong when we took your kindness and never thought to give anything back. One by one, they started setting things down. Casserole dishes, bags of groceries, fresh bread, canned goods, vegetables, even a small bag of coal for my furnace. This isn't charity, Tom said firmly. This is paying back what we owe. This is showing you that we learned something from watching you give when you had every reason not to. I felt tears burning in my eyes. You don't owe me anything. Yes, we do, a voice said from the back, and I looked up to see others I recognized. The butcher's wife, the school teacher, old Mr. Patterson from the post office. People I'd helped, yes, but also people I'd never expected to see standing in solidarity. The teacher stepped forward. Mrs. Alice,
I never came to your door for food. My husband and I managed to get by. But I watched what you did. I watched you give until you had nothing, and I was ashamed because I had plenty and gave nothing. She held out an envelope. This is $300. It's what I would have spent on a new television we don't need. I want you to have it. I want you to use it to keep doing what you do, because this town needs you more than it needs people like Gerald Marcus. More envelopes appeared. $10 here, $20 there. One elderly woman pressed $5 into my hand, whispering, "It's all I have, but it's yours." I stood there on my porch, surrounded by the people I'd served, and I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They came like a flood, washing away months of exhaustion and worry and fear. "Why?" I whispered. "Why now?" Mrs. Henderson took my hand. "Because we finally understand what you've been trying to teach us all along. That community isn't about who has the most. It's about who gives the most of what they have. And you, Alice, you gave everything." Friends, if this story is touching your heart, if Grandma Alice's wisdom is speaking to your soul, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to Grandma Alice Stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a lesson about life, love, and the power of kindness. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today, because these stories, they're not just tales, they're truth wrapped in love. Now, let's continue. Tom Collins cleared his throat. "There's something else, Mrs. Alice. We had a meeting last night, all of us, and we've decided we're not taking Gerald Marcus's job offer." I looked up sharply. "But you need work. We need dignity more," he said firmly. "We're going to start a cooperative. Pool our skills, our resources. Maybe it won't be much at first, but it'll be ours. We'll be working for each other instead of for someone who sees us as disposable. And we want you to be part of it," his wife added. "Not as a worker, but as a guide. A reminder of what we're building this for." I shook my head in wonder. "I don't know anything about running a business." "You know about building community," Mrs. Henderson said. "That's more valuable than any business degree." The sun had fully risen now, casting golden light across the yard, across the faces of these people who'd gone from neighbors to strangers to family. My small house, my humble, worn, poor little house, had become the center of something I never imagined. Not because I had wealth, but because I had something wealth could never buy. That afternoon, after they'd left and I'd carried all the food and supplies inside, I sat at my kitchen table and counted the money they'd given me. $473. More money than I'd seen in 2 years. I could have kept it all. Lord knows I needed it. But that's not who I was. I kept enough to fill my pantry and fix my furnace. The rest? I donated to the town school lunch program so children wouldn't go hungry while their parents figured things out.